Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll meet artist Elizabeth Rockstadt. But first, joining me now is retired editorial page editor at the Forum, Jack Zaleski. Jack, thanks so much for joining us today.
John, it's good to be with you.
Well, you're here to talk about something that you've written a book about the history of Forum Communications. And we're going to talk about that. But before we do, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I've been in North Dakota for most of my adult life. I was born in New England, in Connecticut, educated at New Britain, Connecticut Public Schools, University of Connecticut. Ended up coming out to North Dakota as a VISTA volunteer, you know, the old Domestic Peace Corps. Worked on the reservation up at Turtle Mountain for a year. This is back in the dark ages now. It seems like such a long time ago. And at the time, my wife-to-be was a student at the University of North Dakota in the School of Social Work, and she was doing an internship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And one thing led to another, and we met, and we've been together ever since, and decided to settle in North Dakota. It was a good decision. We've both done well here, and you know, I had an excellent 30-year, 32-year career with the Forum right here in Fargo.
Yeah. Well, I assume writing the history of Forum Communications, well, I'm assuming it was an exhausting project, but how did the idea start?
John, the idea started several years ago. The publisher then, who is now chairman of the board and publisher emeritus, William Marsill, we call him Bill Sr., wanted to update a history that had been done in 1978 for the 100th anniversary of the paper. That history was done by Melvin Moline, a professor of journalism and history, or English, I believe, at Moorhead State University. And so Bill Sr. wanted an update. He'd been talking about it for a long time. It was dropped for a while. And then when my retirement came along, he revived the idea, and he said, listen, we'd like to commission you to write this modern history, an updated history of the company. He didn't want to go all the way back. He didn't want to revisit all the material that had been covered in the first book. He wanted an updated history from about the mid-70s to now. And so I took it on in about 2017, began the work, worked for a couple of years, and it was done in early 2020. In the spring, we were ready to roll it out, but as we know, the COVID pandemic put a stop to a lot of things, so we delayed it and we rolled it out this fall. So that was the process. So it was a little more than a 2-year process: research, writing, rewriting, editing, working with people to do some editing, running it past Bill Sr. And Bill Jr., his son, who's the publisher at the Forum now, and Jane Marsill, Bill Sr.'s wife, who lived much of this history. And so, yeah, it was an exhausting process, exhilarating and sometimes, frustrating at other times, but I am pleased with the finished product. The book is a nice bound volume. The layout and design, which was done by Forum Communications Printing, a really talented designer named James Strom, gets the credit for the look of the book. And most importantly, Bill Sr. and his wife Jane liked the book, and you know, they paid the freight. They asked me to do it. If they like it, I like it.
Well, you talked some, but the research itself, was most of it in the archives of the Forum, or did you have to talk to people who had been there over time?
Well, it's both. I was fortunate because I worked for the paper, you know, almost a third of the time that the Marsill Black family has owned the paper, that 100 years. So I knew a lot of the people. I knew a lot of the retirees who had worked there longer than I had. And since it was a history from about the mid-70s to now, I'd lived a part of it myself. But what was important is that so many of the people who are in the book and who became sources of good information are still alive. Most are still alive. Some have since passed. And picking their brains, spending time with them, getting their knowledge of the history and some of the characters have gone through the Forum and its various divisions over the last few years was extremely valuable. In addition, we have an excellent archive in the Forum Library, in the Forum building, right off the newsroom, which was established in 1921 by one of the first editors, Happy Paulson was his name. And that was visionary. That library has been preserved and enhanced and treasured from 1921 until the present day. And it is an excellent resource. And other researchers use it, other historians use it, because it's the only place where you can get a certain take on information. There's a lot of old front pages, a clipping file that goes all the way back, decades and decades. So that resource was good. The personal resources, the archive resources, and then other sources of information in other publications that I got a hold of that the forum had done over the years also contributed to the research, the body of research that that is in the book.
Now, although you said you didn't go back, but how and when did the Forum newspaper start?
Well, we're looking at about 140 some odd year history when you trace it all the way back to a fellow named Alanson Edwards, who started a paper called the Argus. And the Argus is the forerunner of the Forum. Then it became the Argus and the Republican. Then it became the Republican and the Forum, and then the Forum. So the roots of the paper can be traced back 144, 145 years to territorial days when Fargo was kind of a collection of squalid huts and buildings and a frontier town. The family that owns it now and has owned it for 5 generations has owned the paper since 1917, when the first Black, Norman B. Black, bought the paper for $100,000, which today translates into about $1.4 million. And the story of how he cobbled that financial package together is an interesting part of the story too. And since then, the Black family, through Jane Black, and then Bill Marcille, after into the 1960s, have continued that family tradition. And so we're now in the 5th generation of ownership with Bill Marcille Jr. as publisher, CEO, and general manager. So it's been a remarkable history, not only a newspaper story or a business story, but a remarkable family continuity story, because there are very few newspapers, very few businesses really, that are able to say they have maintained ownership in the same family and thrived and done well for more than 100 years.
Exactly. Well, can you talk about some of the significant events that helped shape the paper, or maybe the paper helped shape some of the events along the way too? But
well, it did. I mean, for many years, as you know, we've been around a long time, that the newspaper was the only game in town. That changed, began to change rapidly in the 1950s. The Forum got involved in radio early on. Radio came to Fargo in about 1922. WDAY was the first AM station in the state. The Forum was involved in ownership in radio in 1922, bought more ownership as the years went on, finally bought full ownership in broadcast, TV and radio. So that was a seminal event when the newspaper company became a media company and owned print and broadcast. So that was one thing. One of the other, I think, events that made the Forum into a very good newspaper was its coverage in 1957 of the June tornado, the fatal tornado. Some extraordinary photography, which is still used in journalism classes around the country, was done during that time, during that tornado, when several people were killed, an entire family was killed. There was that iconic picture of a man bringing a dead child out of the wreckage. That was, is still used. That earned the Forum a Pulitzer for deadline reporting, which is the coveted one, deadline reporting, and so that gave the Forum newspaper and its staff more status and confidence and capability of doing the kind of job they did subsequently. So that was a seminal event. The other thing is the changes in technology. Those have come. It's always changed. I'm old enough to have bridged the time from the old hot metal days and linotype machines. My father and uncle were linotype operators, to now, where everything is on screen and in your hand, and people working from home, whether it's because of the pandemic or because you can do it now because of the technology. Those have been major changes. The thing that has been different about this era of change is the speed. and the acceleration of the change. And the company has had to adapt to that, and that's reflected in the book on how the company has had to adapt to those changes that were no one could have forecast. And not only could not have forecast, but many, many companies, newspaper companies, media companies did not adapt and are gone. The Forum saw it coming, began to make the changes early, began to put in place people who understood the technology, and that has worked. It's going pretty well. We have new products now, like the one that I really like is called the e-paper, which is on screen. It's an actual, looks like the newspaper, but it's on the electronic screen. I'm an old print guy. I like the smell and the feel of a print newspaper in the morning. I still get the print products that we do, the Wednesday and Saturday editions. And I sometimes find myself printing out the e-paper on a large format piece of paper, stapling it together so I have a print newspaper. But that era is fading fast, and the new way of distribution, is only about distribution, content, journalism, good work, reporting in the same way with the same standards we always worked under. That's still going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand you've got maybe a piece you can read to us
well,
that you've picked out. So yeah, why don't you do that?
There's a couple of things. There's an opening piece or two that sort of sets the tone. This is in the introduction. It says, "No one could have known on a bright day in September 1993 that the printing press that was being dedicated with pride and fanfare by the Forum of Fargo Moorhead would be viewed as old school in fewer than 20 years. The offset press was the best newspaper printing technology in the world, an investment of several $1 million. It would more than double the Forum's publishing capacity. It would deliver to subscribers and advertisers a high-quality, full-color daily newspaper, which they had been demanding. Well into the 21st century, it was doing precisely that." And of course, then it began to change, and so that changed a lot. But that sort of sets the tone for what we've been talking about regarding change in the business, and it goes on from there and starts to describe how these changes affected all the departments in the
yeah.
in
Well,
the
we
paper.
need to talk about change in a moment, but I understand that there was an attempted takeover in the '80s of the paper. Is that true?
Yes. In the early '80s, the man who had been editor for many, many years, and his father before him before that, from 1921 to 1980, the Forum had two editors, and they were a father and a son, the Paulsons, Happy Paulson and John Dee. John Dee was eased out in 1980, and people will remember Joe Dill, the legendary Joe Dill, who was editor of the paper after 1980, took over at the time. Well, John Paulson was not really happy about being eased out, and so he led what was an attempted hostile takeover that took form in 1984. And during that time, several people who had been involved with the Forum and were shareholders of the Forum combined, there were 3 or 4 of them, and tried to oust Bill Marcil as publisher and chairman of the board. So this got into a very heated legal battle and public battle. As Bill Sr. said at the time, it got nasty. And it did. And there's still some nastiness out there among people who were involved in it that hasn't gone away. The bottom line is that Bill Marcil and his team had the clout in terms of voting shares on the board, and that was enough to save the company for the family, keep it in family ownership, keep it locally based, and they bought out those shareholders who were trying to take over the company. And there's some pretty good, I think, evidence that had it gone the other way, had Bill and Jane Marcil not won this contest for control, none of us would be here talking about it today. The paper likely would have been sold to one of the large media companies and no longer had the local roots, and who knows what would have happened after that. But it didn't happen that way, and it's still in local ownership and thriving.
Well, and you say thriving, but some people may question, because Forum Communications, well, especially the newspaper part of it, is going through significant changes.
Mm-hmm.
They've gone from 7 days a week now to 2 days a week delivery for newspaper.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the new era, and where do you see it going forward?
Well, I see it. I see the time of the daily print newspaper on your front stoop in the morning as history. I think the paper will probably keep its print editions on Wednesday and Saturday because there are reasons to do that. For instance, people like to see the obituaries in the print, and you'll notice if you look at the print paper on those days, it's loaded with obituaries. And some of the advertisers like the inserts in the print paper. But what is happening, John, is that the online products, the e-paper in particular, are just taking off. People are really beginning to like it. They like the convenience of it. They like the ability to manipulate the size of the type. And when you open it up on a screen, it's like you can turn the pages electronically. You don't have the paper feel for it, but you have a good, clear image. It looks just like a newspaper page. The reproduction, the pictures, all of it are beautiful. The advertising is good. And the other benefit of having an e-paper online is that the news whole is unlimited. When you had paper, you were limited to how big the paper could be, how much news you could get into it. When you have an electronic page, electronic pages, you can add pages, add pages, add pages. So the e-paper, in addition to having the basic paper, also has bonus sections every day on sports, on international news, on entertainment. It's going really well. That's the future.
Yeah. Are you worried about the future just of newspapers in general, though? Can these smaller newspapers recreate themselves?
No, I think I am worried about that. Here's an example. In my home state, the Hartford Courant, a daily newspaper, which is the oldest paper that has been publishing a daily newspaper continuously, something like since 1764, announced this week that they're closing their newsroom. And it was shocking. I mean, the Courant is one of these papers that's a regional paper that covers all of Connecticut and other areas too. Closing their newsroom and eliminating the expense of the room itself. That doesn't mean they're stopping the news function, but their reporters and editors are working remotely. They're working from home or from locations other than the traditional newsroom. That's an indication of just how deep the changes are going. There's something about the camaraderie of a newsroom that I think those of us who have been there will miss. But new journalists coming up who have not had that experience won't miss it. So I'm worried about that part of journalism, that part of newspapering. The smaller newspapers in the small markets, the small weeklies out in North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota, some of those papers are in trouble, and they will disappear and are disappearing and will not come back.
Okay. Well, Jack, I know your book here, but what's been the reaction to it so far?
Well, John, it's selling. So, in fact, just a few days ago, it's over at Zambros. It's Barnes & Noble. And Greg Danz at Zambros called a couple of days ago, and the first shipment of books we brought over there sold out. Brought another one over, and half of that was spoken for. It's also being sold online. The Forum has an online an online site for selling stuff, sweatshirts and stuff and books, selling very well. The initial printing of this of the book, we've sold maybe about half of them, and that's 500. The initial printing was 500 books. So it's moving well. The timing is good because of the holiday season.
Well, you said, so for the holidays, can you tell the folks one more time, if people want a copy, where can they go and, is it available?
They can go online to the Forum site. They can go to Zambros and Barnes & Noble.
Yeah. So, well, Jack, it's a good looking book, and we thank you for joining us today.
Nice to be with you, John. Thank you.
Stay tuned for more. Mosaic artist Elizabeth Rockstad of Ada, Minnesota uses her K-12 art education degree at her business called Studio 413. The mission of her studio is to teach everyone, no matter the age, how to create their very own pieces of art.
Art is important for everyone, no matter your age, no matter anything. Art is one of those things that your body's going to be able to do your whole life. My name's Elizabeth Rockstead. I'm in Ada, Minnesota, and the studio is Studio 413. My family's very encouraging as far as art goes. I had grandmothers who were painters, and my mother is very creative. We just kind of always made stuff as a kid. In school, I kind of enjoyed it, and it kind of took off from there. That's kind of what actually got me into teaching art as well. I went to Moorhead State, and I got my K-12 art education degree. I taught for about 15 or 16 years. I opened the studio in 2011. The business came about because I was actually with some friends at a little resort. The lady had a very small paint your own pottery little studio. So we went in and each made something small. And then I just remember after that kind of always having that in the back of my head. Studio 413 comes from Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's my verse for life in general. So I thought it was quite fitting for starting up a business and putting my trust there. And it's worked out real well. What drew me to mosaics, I started it in college. But then once I opened the studio, I just was able to have more time to work on it. The mosaic process is creating a design, creating artwork using just fill in the blank. You can use just about any material. I use primarily glass, ceramic tile, and now a little more beads and some stonework too. It's cutting the tile and then gluing them on. I'll attach my glue to the surface and then attach my tiles to the glue. Once that glue dries, then you grout. It's like frosting a cake. You just kind of smear it over everything, wipe off all the grout, and the tiles come through. Depending on the pieces, there's a lot of cleaning and shining and buffing and all of that stuff that you can do later on. In fact, there's some pieces where I have honestly clocked more hours cleaning than I did making it. And then depending on where it's going, you seal it or you don't seal it. That's basically it. What draws me to the mosaics is more the physicality of it. I love to work with my hands. It's the tactile part of it for me. I love texture, I love color, and with mosaics you get everything. I like the idea of reusing things that people maybe discard or don't see as important or don't see the value in. With mosaics, you can use it. I kind of joke that's the good and bad thing with mosaics is you can mosaic almost anything, you can mosaic with almost anything. Bad side, you can mosaic almost anything, and you can mosaic with almost anything. I tend to collect because everything I see, or if something breaks, I think, oh, I can use it. When you're working with all of those things and being blessed to be in a small town, at least once a week, if not more, someone comes in and tells me, I have this that we're just going to throw away. Do you want it? That idea of reusing is important to me. One of my favorites is probably a Four Seasons window. I did an artist in residency at West Acres in 2019. I think I like it because when I started it, I didn't like it. I just kept going with it, and then as it progressed, I liked it more and more, and then when I finished it, it's kind of one of my favorite pieces now. The piece I'm working on now is a commission piece that is going up in Crookston at Riverview Clinic. I'm making 10 large-scale mandala. I kind of call them like lollipop flowers. So there's a stem and then a mandala for the flower on top with leaves. It's probably the largest project I've done as far as commission-wise. The commission work I have done have been windows. I kind of started out mosaicing, it's called glass on glass mosaic windows. Those are just old barn windows or a window from great-grandma's farm home. But now I've done everything from a deer head, not a huge one, but just I had never really done a three-dimensional animal, so to speak. And honestly, like the challenge and just coming up with the idea and coming up with a way to create it. I wouldn't say I like more, but that is an aspect of commission work that I do enjoy. I don't want to say I'm a people pleaser, but when it comes to commissions, it's important to me. I want them to look at it and just feel joy from it. I think because I feel like I've done it all my life, it's almost second nature. So it just kind of feels natural. It just kind of feels like that's what I was made to do, meant to do. You hear stories, and you know people who go to a job and don't enjoy it, and I just think, oh, thank you. Thank you so much that I get to do what I get to do, because I can't imagine doing anything else.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.